Task 1 asks us to look at an unusual spike in the number of users last year. So we've got to investigate it, and step 1, we have to try and work out when that spike happened. If we plot a nice graph of the number of visitors along the year, we can see one spike happened in December. What I've done here then is I've narrowed the date range down to the whole of December of last year, and we can see in the circled area here, about December 6th, there was a spike in the number of visitors. It's about 400,000. Usually in this kind of scenario, we want to look for other instances that there were unusually large amounts of traffic as well. It's not in this case, but it's great to have a look for patterns and seasonality as well. Now that we've found the date that the spike happened, we now want to have a look to see if they're legitimate users. It's really important when you're working with a website that when we have these large spikes in traffic, you check that the users are actually legitimate. Websites can get botted quite easily, and before we take any actionable insights away from it, we need to work out if this spike is true. So the best way to do this, given the data we've got, is to analyse the browser that the user has come from to see if any are abnormal for that day. Here I've got a table of all the browsers, and it's ordered in a decrease in value of the number of visitors with the total percentage that it is. We can see that the greatest percentage is made up of Safari and Chrome, and this is completely normal. It's not surprising to see that these are two popular browser types. Normally with this kind of data, we might also have the opportunity to have more user data as well. We don't in this scenario, but a good tell in that is the emails that is attached to each user. The emails there, sometimes they're quite spammy and it's really easy to spot if they're bots, so it's really useful. But in this task, it's not applicable. So all you'd need to do to see here is the number of visitors per browser type. For the final part of this task, all we want to do is isolate that date where the spike happened and see what the users were actually viewing that day. We want to have a look at the content type and the tag and see if it was either a contribution of all the traffic or if there was a particular popular item on the site. So what I've done here, I've broken down the content type on the left and the content tag on the right, which I'll go into a second. But we've isolated December the 6th here, and we can see that it's about 23% and 21% of the content viewed on that site from the number of visitors was advice and organisation. It's pretty consistent across the board for the rest of them, but they're all quite high. And it's important we have a look at other days as well to see if this is out of the usual. So what I've done here, I've taken 2 dates either side of it, the 1st of the 12th and then the 13th of the 12th. But we can see much less in total, around about 7.5 for the first and 10,000 for the others for the highest. But we can see there's more of a mixture around there, and advice and organisation aren't always necessarily the top performing ones on those days. We've also decided to have a look at the yearly visitors per content type as well. So I've broken it down to a pie chart because it's important to visualize things in different ways that are appealing for people to look at. You don't just want to overload them with the same amount of information. You've got to take into consideration the kind of data you want to show. So here what I've done, you can see it's a pretty even split across all of them for the yearly visitors. And this isn't the same as this, it's more skewed towards advice and organisation. I've replicated pretty much the same thing on the right hand side, but this time we're going to be looking at the content tag. We can see I've still isolated December 6th and plotted them against the number of visitors, and I've done the same with the comparison, and it's a pretty similar story. The only change I have made is this bit here. I've taken into consideration how many content tags there are. If I plotted it as a pie chart, you wouldn't be able to read any of it. It's a very important skill for a data analyst to have, is to understand the data that they have and then plot it in the best way possible to be able to take away insights from that. We can see here that the retail trade here is the highest number of visitors for the year. It makes up just about 1%, so we can imagine how many we have. But up here we've got apparel manufacturing, retail trade, ambulatory healthcare services, administrative support, and so on and so on. A lot of the ones that appear here belong in here as well. So we have to have a think. If there's nearly 40,000 coming up in this one day here, and this is the yearly total at only about 170,000, this one day is contributing a lot to all of them. Finally, we have to think about what the output for this task would be. To me, it sounds like a one-off request, so you'd only be expected to give perhaps a few line responses with your evidence providing for it. So I've written an example one here. I've said the spike is from legitimate users with provided browser evidence, and the main contributors are Chrome and Safari, which are two popular browsers. Content as a whole increased, but the main content type increases were with organisation and advice content, up by the percentages given as well there. The tags for the content also increased as a whole on this day, but for the top content tags for this year, this single day contributed towards 20% of their total number of visitors. It's sometimes good to give a few reasons for why this could happen as well. So these could be trending topics on this day for reasons beyond the site, and/or content put on it. It'd be important to have a look at the content put out per type as well as an actual count. But in this task, we haven't given you the data for that, so you wouldn't be expected to here. For the second task, we've been asked if we could find out how the site is performing year on year so far, and also specifically content tagged by data science. We'll tackle the first part of it first, and what I've done, I've plotted the users month by month. I've plotted them against each year as well, so we can have a direct visualization of how it's performing each year. So we can see here, it's slowly gone down over the years, and there's that spike we were doing in the last task last December. I've also included the year-to-date and last month key figure. It's important to have these big figures so non-technical users who just want quick information can see it at a glance without having to drill into the data as well. I've also included a custom field in this, the sessions per user. I thought it'd be more useful than just the sessions. It's a good measure of how engaged the users are if they keep coming back for more content as well. And we can see this has stayed mainly flat as well. So considering that the users has gone down and the sessions per user has stayed the same, it's quite a good indicator that the content that the website is putting out is doing quite well. In the second part of this one, we'll drill further into content type and specifically data science. It's quite a common request that you'd want to look at one specific thing, and it's just as simple as filtering down on that. So here what I've done originally, I've plotted out the content type as a table amongst each year with the number of visitors, with the grand total at each at the bottom. It's important to see the general trend, so we can see that there was a massive slump considering the number of total visitors in 2020. And you can think of outside reasons for this, such as like the pandemic. And it's good to have general knowledge of what's going on in the world and then backing that up with context to what's happened to your website as well. When we've drilled down into the data science, which I've done so on the left, we've also broken that down by content type, and we can see that it's also decreased. And this year is looking like, although the year's not done, it'll be on track to be roughly around the same. Data science content has seen different growth over the years for a number of visitors viewing that content, and content that would be considered growing in popularity for data science content tag content, organizations, case studies and videos. My biggest cause of concern though would be for advice. There's a massive drop, and although this year isn't completed, it does look slightly promising to get back up towards that 26,000 figure here. But it's then you can take away these sorts of insights and give them to the people who write the content or the people who promote it, who then would be able to try and do some work on this. For the third task, we want to have a look at what content we're putting on our site, especially over the last few months that users are engaging the least with. First thing we want to do here is to check if there are any site issues with certain browsers that have a low bounce rate. If there is, it could potentially mean that a site's not optimized. Say if your mobile devices have a high bounce rate. If the page isn't loading properly, users are more likely to leave quickly, and then we'd have an issue there. So what I've done here, I've split it out by device category. So we've got mobile, desktop and tablet, and we can see that they're all around 50%. For bounce rate, about 50 to 70% is average for a site. It's a measure of the users who leave without making an action on the site. And it could be due to the site issues that I've just mentioned, or a lack of engaging content, which is what the second part of the task is about. I've also broken it down by browser. So the top 5 ones here are Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox and Safari in-app. Safari in-app is when you open a link on social, so you'd expect it to have a higher bounce rate than the others, but the others all look really good. So we can say with confidence that there's no site issues that will restrict this. For the second part of this task, we're looking at how the content is doing, if it's engaging or not. First of what I've done is I've plotted over the last few months, like the task specified the bounce rate, and you can see it's gone up and down all throughout May into August. Along that chart, I've also plotted a line of best fit as well. And this is really useful because just looking at the blue line, it's not easy to tell that it's increasing, but we can see there is a slow increase. And obviously we don't want it to keep going, but it's within the average bounce rate that we'd consider good for the site. So it's still looking quite positive. On the right-hand side, what I've done over the same time period, I've broken down all the content tags and their relative bounce rate on average across the same time period and ordered it in decreasing value. So the highest one here, 62%, is still within that 50-70% that's quite good, but compared to the rest of the site and the average for the whole site, it's not that great. So if we have a look down here, we can just scroll down. You can see there's 115 in total, and it's about 55 content tags that are over the average. Now, some of these perhaps wouldn't be a complete worry to us. So I'd say maybe only the top 10 would have to be investigated. So that's those with a bounce rate of over 55% if we want to try and get that back down. This could then be taken to the people who write it or the people that promote it, and then hopefully it'll be able to create more engaging content with the users. This last task, we've asked you to set up a dashboard that displays content performance year on year, as well as the monthly content performance by tag and type. Making a dashboard is one of the main jobs that data analysts will have to do. They've got to be able to display concise information with what the person's asking. And it's a great skill to have because you want to be able to prioritize your workload. And by knowing what we've done in the previous task, much like in real life, you'll be able to double up and prioritize the work and save the stuff and perhaps use the stuff you already have. So first things you'll notice in this dashboard that I've just created as a quick mock-up is that the users and session per users was made in a previous task. This is a prime example of that, and this is exactly what the task asked for. I've also included other stats as well though to help bridge that gap that was missed in that first question. So I've got sessions year to date, year on year comparisons with that. So you can see it's at 7.6 million for the year, down 22% from last year. I've also done the same for the last calendar month. Giving as much information as possible in a visually appealing manner is really important because not everyone wants to have or has the time to drill through the data. I've included more tables down here of the sessions per user split out by date per year so we can see how that's changed over the years as well. This is also similar to one of the other tasks I've just modified because I thought it'd be better visualized like this in this task here. And then below that, I've got device category yearly average just as a percentage, and then the average bounce rate. Using a different array of visualizations is really great because it not only keeps the person reading it, looking at them, it's a much nicer way of telling the story of what the data has to offer. At the very bottom of this dashboard, I've got a separate bit of information. It's nice to split out the dashboard in a chronological order of what the request is asking, and that way you're not overloading the reader too much. So at the bottom here, we break down the content and see how that's performing monthly, like the task asks. On the left-hand side, I've got the top performers, and on the right-hand side, I've got the bottom performers. Having both of these as stark comparison is really good. So what I've wanted to do here is I've taken the last calendar month of the number of visitors of each of them, and then ordered them top 10 for both of them. And then on the far right column in both of those tables, we've got the percentage changes from last month. Perhaps the most important detail in this is the percentage changes, because then you can see how they're doing and the progress they're making. So we can see a lot of the top performers on the left-hand side had increases, and the ones on the right, the lowest performers, had decreases, which is to be expected. But if you have a look, data processing, hosting and related services did in fact increase. So even though it's one of the worst performers, it is increasing, and that's a valuable insight to take away with, because then you can have a look at what previous work's been done for that to promote that, and you can say that is working, you can continue that. Whereas the rest, perhaps you can look at what you've done there and take away from that to understand what you can do to improve those as well.